think it's important for the viewers to understand that abiraterone acetate, Zytiga, enzalutamide Xtandi, Sapulus LT Provenge, radium-223 Xofigo, cabazitaxel Jevtana. Their FDA approval is for patients with castration-resistant prostate cancer that have documented radiographic metastatic disease, because we hear this all the time. We hear about people who are prescribing these drugs in the non-metastatic radiographic patient and getting away with it, if you will, because, oh, well, they really have microscopic metastatic disease. And I think it's really important for those of us that manage these patients to understand that's the registry trials were for patients with metastatic radiographic disease. It wasn't in the M0 patient. Now, again, I think we all know that these newer imaging techniques will change this radiographically. What's the significance of these lesions? We just don't know.
So it's sort of interesting, Raoul, if I may interject for a second. If you look at actually the Imagine data, the median time to PSA progression, right, on Imagine was around 28 months.
Right.
And the median time to objective progression was around 45, 44 months. That means that there is a gap of around a year plus between your rising of your PSA, however you define that rising, right, in the trial, and when you develop progressive disease objectively. And more important than that, I think we put a lot of weight on these oral agents, even in the M1 CRPC space. Yes, you can lower PSA, yes, you can reduce tumor size, but I may add the survival improvement that we see with ABIA, with ENSA in the metastatic castration-resistant disease. If I'm 55, I develop CRPC, and you're gonna tell me that my median survival, is actually 35 to 36 months compared to a placebo, right, which is 31, 32, I think we have a lot of work to do, right? Because the reality of it is, it still is a median, but it's not a home run for most patients. And in fact, the vast majority of patients on ABI and ENSA are not those people who are driving the curves to the right? They're people who actually stand right there. Median progression, yes, is around 16, 18 months, but the median survival is 3 years. And for you to tell a 55-year-old guy that you just operated on a year or 2 years ago, right, develop CRPC, that ABI and ENSA are the best agents that we have in the space, it's just hard.
I would agree with that, and I would say one of the best things about ABI and ENSA is that I believe we can safely combine them with other treatment modalities, and I think that just as we've seen in other solid tumors, that sometimes using multiple approaches simultaneously may be the best way to ensure a more durable response. And so I wonder how that may proceed. I do want to mention, though, too, that I'm also hopeful that the NCI and that the FDA are moving towards using metastasis-free survival as a possible clinically relevant endpoint. I think the ICE-CAP strategy and approach that Chris Sweeney has put forth has demonstrated, at least to me, has demonstrated that metastasis-free survival probably does correlate with overall survival very, very well, and I'm hopeful that that will be something that we'll be able to move forward. And then just one final note to your other points. As medical oncologists, we love to get, again, back to side effects. And I'm working right now to assess the cognitive function changes with enzalutamide, because I love that drug, and I do think for some patients, they tolerate it very well, and I don't know that they have many side effects. But there are some patients who seem to have profound fatigue that I believe is also coupled with a cognitive function issue. And I think part of what we should do as medical oncologists and as a field is identify those patients who may be more susceptible to developing cognitive dysfunction. And if we can pick them out from the get-go, we may be able to direct our therapies more appropriately and maximize quality of life for all patients.
I think that just to dovetail into that, one point that we were making in the first segment was, like, in most cases, try not to put your patient on this train. Try not to start treating them like you were saying with ADT in the M0 hormone sensitive state, so you're not now treating them with second-line agents here. I'm also shocked at the disparity. I'm glad that you're studying it, because in the ADT, even away from the enzalutamide NABI arms, about 20% of patients will have no side effects that they'll ever report. And it's sort of like shocking. Right. And then the other end of the spectrum, you'll have severe side effects. A second point, just to go back to serial imaging, because Dr. Garcia brought up the idea that, when you're putting people on AbbVie or Enza, now instead of in the hormone-sensitive state pushing towards castrate resistance, you're now pushing these castrate-resistant people possibly towards a small cell or neuroendocrine, very dangerous phenotype. And I'm wondering, for me, myself, I don't do a lot of this, but I think that imaging at some kind of serial level might become more important in that M0 CRPC state, because you can't fully trust your PSA that's going to be really so highly suppressed by these agents. And so I just thought I'd get your thoughts on, are you...
I would add 2 points to that. Number one, I think we saw some recent data that says that 25% of the patients on enzalutamide will not have a PSA change, but they'll end up showing metastatic or worsening radiographic progression. And so I think you're right. Are we creating a different phenotype that's out there that we really want to be considering chemo earlier and things like that? I know we're not going to really address ARB7, but I think that's going to be important going forward. I think all of us who are in this space have dealt with the toxicities of both drugs, and we're participating in the REACT trial, which is randomizing 50 guys to AbbVie and 50 to Enza, and then the patient and the caregiver are coming in on a 1-month interval and 2 months to see exactly, get an impression of what the side effect profile is and identifying the neurotoxicity that we all think exists that really hasn't been as well reported as I think we like. I would like to be able to identify ahead of time, though. I like what you said, Alicia, because you don't know which patient's going to have that side effect, who is going to be that 20 to 30% per se.
And there is an interest from the company who has Enza to precisely assess those patients who develop neurocognitive dysfunction, but at the same time, it is the rationale that our companies are using to develop the agents that do not cross the blood-brain barrier, right, that much. It's just about, it's sort of interesting because Enza does actually compete for chloride channels in GABA receptors, and then ODM doesn't appear to do that. And the question with apalutamide is it appears not to be that, it's not as severe, as we see with enzalutamide. Now, to your point about PSA and so forth, it is, again, a double edge when we're actually trying to remove ourselves from PSA and chasing PSA, right? We remind ourselves that when we look at actually, for instance, the PREVAIL and the Cougar 302 data, we didn't use PSA to make treatment decisions as to efficacy or lack thereof. We only say, okay, we're going to capture your PSA, but we're going to measure rPFS as a composite endpoint of symptoms or radiographic progression. And to your point, if you look at the subset analysis, who are the patients who benefit truly, from oral therapy are those who actually have PSA declines. And yet today, our guidelines would suggest that if you have someone who start AbbVie or Enza, you can continue even if their PSA is rising, which I fundamentally think is a huge mistake, because what you're doing is seeing the natural history of their disease in front of your eyes. And it may be that those patients may have a splice variance or not, I don't know, but clearly there's around 30% of patients in whom within the first 3 months, I usually do PSAs every 4 weeks for the first 3 months. If those patients actually do have a PSA decline in the first month, then they go every 3 months. On the contrary, for those who don't have a PSA decline and they're doing well with AEs, then I capture PSA at 4 weeks later and at 12 weeks. And if by 12 weeks your PSA has not declined, I stop therapy and move on. Because those patients, to me, biologically, may be splice variant positive or maybe not. But clearly, those patients, in my hands, I don't believe they're going to benefit from oral therapy, and I certainly wouldn't put them on a sequential maneuver either.